All right, welcome to the first session of the 2026 INIT Hello. The first presentation will be by Stephane Racle on the discs we almost left behind. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Paul, and hello, everybody. Great to be here. I wanted to make it last year, but was not able to. But this year, the timing worked well. Thank you to the event organizers for putting this on. This is awesome and fantastic to meet so many people that I met online before, but not in person, and then people that I have not met online, but that I have now met in person. It's fantastic. So this is actually my first Apple II conference of any kind. And today I'm going to tell you a story, or stories, because I like stories, and because everything and everyone has a story. But it's not just any story; it's a story of Apple II software archiving and preservation, which is near and dear to the hearts of many of us here. It's a story of software that, in some cases, might have gotten lost and did not, which is good. So, I will say this: what I found out over the last 25 years or so is that, above all, preserving Apple II software takes determination, takes a good amount of luck, and often a lot of patience. Because before you can archive software, you actually have to find it. But what I've also found through this archiving journey is that there's a very deep human element to it, and it's part of what's rewarding. Sometimes it's with the people that actually wrote the software or were associated with writing the software. Sometimes it's with people that actually have the software and that have been holding on to it for many, many years. That doesn't speak to the technical aspects of preservation. I'm not going to really touch much on those today, largely because it's actually not my area of expertise. But I do need to mention at this point the tremendous work of people like John Morris and 4AM, who've made this technically possible and really have made possible this golden age of Apple II software preservation and archiving that we now have. My presentation is entirely pictures. Should take, there's some text on some of the pictures. Should take maybe 25, 30 minutes, which will leave us some time for questions and comments, discussion at the end. So all stories have a beginning. This one starts in 1983 when my parents bought us an Apple IIe. My brother had some friends in France. We actually lived there from 1981 to 1983, and they used to send him copied discs. I was pretty young back then, didn't really understand, what the difference was between copies, original. All I knew, I liked to play games, and favorites quickly became adventure games. So that Christmas in 1983, Suspended, the game by Infocom. How many people are familiar with Suspended? Okay, awesome. So if you know the game, it's actually a pretty different Infocom game, but a pretty hard Infocom game, especially for somebody who's pretty young. But the packaging, amazing, right? I mean, look at this with the mask and the eyes and the little folder with the different robots that you moved around the complex. And if you know Infocom, really all of their packaging is pretty fantastic. My brother cut out that mask. This is not the original package that we had, unfortunately. The original one, my brother cut out the mask for a Halloween party to wear at a Halloween party. Yes, I know, but I did manage to find another copy. And Suspended really made me realize that I really loved original game packaging. But what was interesting is that at the time, I didn't really understand that other games had game packaging. All the arcade games that we had didn't quite understand that those were, commercially released with some kind of packaging. As I mentioned, we had lots of copied games. One of the copied games that we had was Masquerade. And this is actually the disc that we had of Masquerade. I still have it. And how many of you know Masquerade? Maybe. Yes. Okay. So it's another adventure game. Pretty whimsical game beautifully illustrated, as you can see here. It was actually a professional illustrator by the name of Racle who did the artwork for that game. And it's a notoriously difficult game if you don't know the game. And the reason it's difficult is not that it's really unfair, that the puzzles are unfair, as you see in many of the games of the time. It's that there's multiple ways to use up items in the game, and you're never quite sure if you're doing it in the right way, or if by using an item in a certain way later on in the game, you're going to have, well, you messed up because you needed to keep that item. Boy, did I try hard many, many, many times to complete the game. Never managed to do so, not back then anyways. The game was written by an author by the name of Dale Johnson and released by Phoenix Software in 1984. I didn't know that back then because we had a cracked copy, and the title screen was defaced because it was a cracked copy, so it didn't actually have the author's name nor the company's name on there. And I had no idea who had released this game, or didn't even make the association that it was commercially released, really, and how that sort of worked. So yeah, didn't really give, after trying many, many times and never solving it, didn't really give too much of a thought to it. And now I'm going to skip ahead about 20 years. So in the 90s, we still had the Apple II. My level of interest kind of went down, which is a bit unfortunate, but I joined the military in the 90s. I went to university, etc. That sort of took over my life. In the early 2000s, I had more time. I had renewed interest, and there was more information available online as well about the Apple II and Apple II software. And once in a while, I would check out eBay. And eBay is actually a reasonable source for Apple II stuff. It particularly was, back then. Of course, sellers think that, each of their games that they're selling are worth hundreds and thousands of dollars. So it's not the best place to find stuff, but once in a while, there's some interesting stuff on there. So anyways, one day back in March 2003, I looked on eBay, and pretty randomly, I see this. It's a copy of Masquerade. It's a shrink-wrapped copy of Masquerade, a game that, like I said, I never really even thought about the fact that it came in a game package. So I was like, oh, there is such a thing as packaging for these games. I'm really curious. I've never seen this before, certainly never seen a shrink-wrapped copy of it before. So I wrote to the seller, and this is what he responded. Hopefully you can read this. So I had inadvertently made a connection with the founder of Phoenix Software. So that was, the person who didn't write the game, but who released the game. And there was lots of back and forth afterwards between us. We actually struck up a friendship. He told me a whole lot about Phoenix, how he had started Phoenix, founded it actually with another gentleman called Ken Rose, who he ended up buying out because apparently he was a jerk. Anyways, ran Phoenix from his house in the Chicago area. He talked to me about the connection with the Northern Illinois Apple Users Group, and this is how they met, different people, and how he came to have authors for some of the software released by Phoenix. The one product that Phoenix really released that was really popular is a high-res print utility called Zoom Graphics. Fairly well known. Most of you, probably a number of you, have heard of it. And as well, things like, he was sued, or at least threatened to be sued, by online systems over the use of the terminology high-res adventure, because online was protective of that, and they thought that that's who it belonged to, right? So all kinds of really interesting tidbits of information. So then one day, he also tells me he has the original artwork for a number of those games, including Masquerade. And he wants to sell it because they're moving down south. He's downsizing. Would I be interested in this? And the Masquerade artwork, as you saw, is actually really, really nice. It's professional artist, everything. So I said, yes, I'm definitely interested in it. But he said, I don't know how to ship that to you. It's already framed and everything, might be a bit expensive, etc. And I said, well, what about a road trip? What if I go see you? And I'm always up for road trips. I'm here today, so there you go. So back then I lived in Trenton, Ontario, which is to right there. And I mapped it out, and he lived in Wausau, Wisconsin. And it was like 13-hour drive. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. Could do that over a couple of days. And he said, okay. He said, if you come, I'll give you a bunch of stuff, not just the artwork for Masquerade. I'll give you, a whole pile of other stuff. So I did. I did the road trip, and he gave me stuff. He gave me one of the one Apple II that he had kept, which was a 2E, as well as all of his loose floppy disks, a few Phoenix titles, some old Phoenix promotional material, etc. We had some great chats about early computing days, about Phoenix. And he gave me a lead to get in touch with other programmers from Phoenix days, people like Paul Burker, Dave Hawley, who wrote Zoom Graphics, who still lived in the Chicago area. As an aside, I kept in touch with Ron for many years. Him and his wife, Judy, finally moved to Arkansas in 2006. Unfortunately, Ron died in 2017. But I kept in touch with him almost until his death. So back in 2003, 2004. So a few months after I get back home, I looked through everything that I got from Ron in detail. And there was some really interesting things. There was some early versions of Masquerade, one version that had no graphics at all, and it was called Mission and Madness. One version that had what I would call author graphics, like very, very minimalistic graphics before it was professionally illustrated, and it was called Masquerade at that time. And then, there was picture discs from another game that was published by Phoenix called Sherwood Forest, etc. A bunch of Phoenix promotional material, a number of copied documents, copied discs, etc. And then one day, I noticed this. So there was a couple of discs in there that said Phoenix Software consumer mailing list. I'm like, well, that might be interesting. So let's take a look through that. So that was what was on the discs. Sure enough, Consumers Part 2, and then the other disc had Consumers Part 1. Fairly sizable file, right? Yep, it was a list of customers who had returned the customer reply cards to Phoenix. So if you're looking for original software, who better to contact than people who definitely purchased it, returned the customer reply cards, and haven't moved, right? So I went through the list, and I cross-reference with the tools of the time, 411, etc., addresses and names that I could find, and I wrote letters. I wrote a whole pile of letters, like about 250 letters, asking people if, hey, telling them I found their name in a Phoenix Software customer mailing list, and asking them if they still had their old Apple II software. So I waited. And then responses started to come in. Most of them looked like this, right? Your timing was almost right. Others were like, thank you so much you brought back a lot of memories. Unfortunately, I don't have them anymore, but it was great to read your letter and reminisce. People were very kind, very, very kind. Most of them reminisced, like I said, about the Apple II days and what it meant to them to have been part of that, to have had some of the games. A few had a few things left, like sort of the bottom one there. I have a few things and so forth. And then one morning, and I still remember that morning very well, I received a phone call. The phone rang. I was still half asleep, and it was a man on the other end, and he said, hey, I received your letter. And I'm thinking, what letter? And then I'm thinking, oh, I sent many letters. I have no idea who you are, but Okay. And I think I said something stupid like, "I'm sorry, what's your name?" And then, anyways, he told me his name. He said his name was Donald. He apologized for the delay. Told me he was recently out of a coma due to a very serious bout of pneumonia. Like, okay. He said he was a huge gamer back in the days, particularly loved adventure games, still had almost all of his Apple II games sitting on his shelves. And if I wanted, he'd mail them to me, a few at a start, if I sent him my address, and then I could determine whether or not I'm interested in what he had to send. And then a couple of weeks later, a box arrived, and this is an example of what was in it. So, top left, a game called Zodiac Castle by Dynacomp. The bottom, a game called Lost Ark of the Covenant by Microscan, which is a one-of company. Actually, the name of the author is John Bodie. He was the CEO of Black Ops Entertainment in the 90s. But that was his first game that he wrote. And then the other picture, a game called Kukulkan by American Eagle. All games that I had no idea even existed. Games whose sales probably counted in tens of copies, and that in some cases were not available anywhere. So that was pretty good. Donald had kept everything. The Dynacomp one on the top left, as you can see, the envelope, that's how the game was mailed to him. In fact, his address was on that Dynacomp envelope. That's how it was packaged. And over the next year or so, Donald sent me all of his Apple II games. And here again, we developed a friendship. First by mail, but then by email. We corresponded a few times a year. I learned he was originally from Buffalo. His father had died at a young age. He grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, after his mom had remarried. He finally moved to New York City, and he had been in that same apartment since 1955. He loved games. He had gotten an Apple II very early on. Favorites were text adventures. He was a bit less interested in graphics, action, etc. You can see a couple of the exchanges that I had with him back in 2009, 2011. Talked a little bit about family, etc. Unfortunately, I last heard from him in 2016, and then emails and letters went unanswered. He was close to 90 at the time, so I think he probably passed away. But for many years, for about 10 years, we had an ongoing email relationship, and yeah, it was always great to correspond with him. So as I was communicating with Donald, a few more answers to my letters came in, and one of them, and I'm not going to name the person, he's still around to this day, and we're still friends. He told me he had the Phoenix games I had written about, as well as many others. So I asked him if he would consider, mailing them to me. And he said, "Well, I've got quite a few. That might be a bit difficult." I'm like, "Well, just put them in a box or something." He's like, "Well, it'll be a couple of boxes. Why don't you come for a visit?" And it took some time to organize. I was moving at the time. I was posted to a different location for my military job. In fact, overseas to England. But back in May 2006, I was back in Canada. So, hey, see a theme here? I went for a road trip. And, well, he was right when he said he had quite a few items. This is just a sample. There was more. And sorry for the quality of the pictures. This was actually taken with a Palm Trio 650 back in 2006. He loved all sorts of games, and he had kept, everything from his Apple II days. And this is just a sample. This is, there were some real rarities in there. Everything was complete with functioning original discs, instructions. You can see the stuff here, a game called Artisans by Renaissance Software, a game called Boa by Micromagic, something called It's the Pits by Sagebrush Software by C. Ray Anthony. No idea who that person is. In other cases, there was no author even mentioned. likely, labels that were created as a one of just to publish a single title. So yeah, so everything was complete with instructions. My friend talked to me about how he started with the Apple II, told me he intended to sell everything on eBay. He said I look trustworthy. Why don't I take it all uh, and sell it for him on eBay, and then we split the money? And I said, why don't I take it all? I sell half and send you all of that money, and then I keep half. And he literally had so much stuff that it barely fit in my car. There was even some overflow that he had to mail me in a box afterwards. So we did exactly that. And I think I sent him something like $7,000, $8,000. And I still have the email. He said, I nearly fell off my chair when I got that money. To this day, we've kept in touch. We exchange a few emails a year. In 2010, I lived in Nova Scotia. I was posted to Nova Scotia. He decided he wanted to come for a visit to Eastern Canada. He said, why don't I swing by Nova Scotia? And we met up. I met up with him and his wife. Yeah, like I said, hey, where am I? There it is. Yeah, like I said, we keep in touch, still keep in touch to this day. Talked to him actually last New Year's this year, and he's doing well. So it's a great relationship that I've developed as a result of doing this. So as I was doing this, bit of a problem. So I was accumulating software, some very unique titles, but I actually had no way of doing what I wanted to do, which was archiving. So I tried some things such as, Saltine's super transcopy to nib files. That didn't really do what I thought it did. Didn't really work very well. I tried. It was suggested to me that I should do FDI files. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that at some point, but apparently to do that, I needed to actually take the disk out of the jacket. To do so, and it was destructive. So it was like, not really what I want to do. And I was still talking, like I said, with Ron Unrath from Phoenix Software. I was learning about Phoenix. I was talking with Donald and others. Really interesting, and what I thought at the time was some important history. So my focus shifted. I was like, okay, one day, hopefully, we can archive properly. But until then, I doubled down on tracking down authors and hearing and recording those stories, which was not always easy. People with common names, sometimes no names as to who wrote the software. And back then, the online presence was significantly less than even what we have today. But letters did work, and I did keep writing letters to people. And this is what I got back. A little bit long, but I'll talk this over, and hopefully have a bit of time to read what I wrote there. But this is what I got back. So of course, first I went for other Phoenix Software authors. This was the one on the top left is John O'Fallon, who wrote Gemini for Phoenix Software. He talked a lot about Gemini, how the game wasn't particularly successful and really never commercially released. Ron Unrath said it sold maybe 50 to 100 copies, something along those lines. On the right is correspondence with Michael Cashin, who wrote a game called Castles of Darkness. Castles of Darkness was published by an outfit out of Baltimore, actually, called The Logical Choice, which what I'm told is was just a chain of, or maybe just one computer store. And
I'll tell you plenty of stories about that.
well, there you go. That's
They were our direct competition.
okay. Well, that's fantastic because I'd like to hear that for sure. Castles of Darkness looks to be the first adventure game on the Apple II to actually feature animation and sound. So really interesting title, and not a very common title, although a pirated version of that one existed for ages. So I did that for a while. I sent letters, I sent emails. Sometimes I sent them to the wrong people. but they were never too bothered by that. But I managed to get in touch with authors and founders, which sometimes were the same people, from American Eagle and Microlab and Avant-Garde Creations and Highlands Computer Services, Magnum Software, and quite a few others. I also found more software and games, never quite the same success as the examples I gave you before. Sometimes a few things on eBay. But as I was doing that, I still had archiving on my mind. And I'll jump all the way to 2017, and something happened there, which a number of you are familiar with. I said I wouldn't talk too much about the technical aspects. I won't, but around that time, Jason Scott and 4AM made some very public efforts to archive the Apple II software, and almost right at that time, John Morris came out with the applesauce hardware and software, which made archiving possible the way that we needed to be. So not only did I start archiving my titles at the time, but I also redoubled efforts to find unarchived titles. So I leveraged the idea of authors. Authors not only have some interesting stories, but maybe they still have copies of their software. So I started looking through old magazines for the most obscure software advertisement and references. So some examples here, Bezman by John Boehner, sort of a Pac-Man clone that was released. In the middle there, cross-educational software, some strange titles. The Abyssal Zone, an adventure game that was advertised in the Soft Talk classified advertising. I mean, that's literally the only advertising ever for this title. Colorblind by Energy Games. That was actually reviewed in a copy of Soft Talk. APOL 2 software, Apple Targ. Never actually managed to find that. But that was my idea. And my favorite was really the Soft Talk classified advertising, because if you're talking about obscure titles, that's the place to look for it. It didn't always work, and some of the stuff probably never existed. But sometimes it worked, and sometimes spectacularly so. So because of this, going through this, these are some examples of the things that we were able to find and archive. So Hejira by an author named Ted Butler, who is a science fiction author, produced this game while he was recovering from a traffic accident. That disc, you probably can't see on it, but it says serial number 152. That's probably like as high as the serial numbers go for this. I talked a little bit about Abyssal Zone by Salty Software. The Adventures of Sarah and Her Friends by a couple of ladies out of Virginia and North Carolina, who chose to write software specifically for young girls. They released 6 titles. Their 2 last titles, very, very, for the first 4 titles, they actually had a contract with Addison Wesley. So that was, even though it wasn't particularly well marketed, there wasn't a whole lot out there. It did get out there. The 2 last titles they self-published because what happened with Addison Wesley didn't work out, so they did it on their own. It's 2 games called The Adventures of Sarah and Her Friends and The Adventures of Kristen and Her Family. I'd never seen another copy of that before. And then I said spectacularly so. The picture on the right, that's the John Boehner Bez collection of games. He sent me all of his games. Some of them are quite good, actually, with mouse support, sound, etc. And they were never released. Some of them were released through Soft Talk, but some of them were never released. And all of that's been archived. There's other examples, a title called Air Navigation Trainer by somebody called Ken Winograd, Competition Karate by Ed Batasov, who went on to work for Broderbund, something called Asteroid Field by Thorne Harris, Superior Software, and a number of other examples. So then I had an even better idea. I said, I wrote letters to the Phoenix mailing list in 2004. Why don't I try this again? And maybe there's more people that I can match now that we're 14 years later. So almost 40 years after the fact. And I got a few answers, mostly not much, with this one exception from this one person located in New Mexico who responded and said, I still have everything at my mother's house and we need to get rid of it. I said, well, I'm the man for you. So it wasn't easy to get it to Canada. It took over a year to make a deal and ship progressively. But this is the kind of stuff that came out of it. This is a lot of it. That box in that picture on the top left is all original discs. Including some versions of Copy 2 Plus, all kinds of utilities, a bunch of games, some really interesting stuff there. And yeah, so all of that as well has been archived. Some original versions of a number of other copy programs, etc., which I sent to 4AM because he likes those, and we've managed to archive everything. Sometimes, I talked at the beginning, sometimes archiving, finding titles is about determination. Sometimes, and often, there's a whole lot of luck and serendipity involved. Let me give you a couple of examples. So some of you may be familiar with this. Wheeler Dealers. I wrote an article for Juice.gs about it a few years back. But if you don't know, that game is the first computer game to come in a box. It was written by a fairly well-known author, Danny Bunton Berry, in 1978, 1979 or so. It's sold in the order of 50 copies, and it has huge historical value, but it was not available anywhere. So, Danny Bunton Berry died in 1998 at the age of 49, and therefore it's pretty hard to track down, so I couldn't just go to the author. Speakeasy Software, by the way, the publisher out of Kempville, which is a small town near Ottawa where I live in Canada, where I'm from. So I tried with Bunton Berry's family, but really had no real luck there. So then I said, okay, well, maybe the next best thing is to try and find out who was behind Speakeasy Software. There was no names anywhere, though, nothing about who is Speakeasy Software. So, okay, I have my work cut out for me. Finally, in 2008, I found a name in an old magazine of someone who had written a transactional analysis package for Speakeasy. I managed to track them down, find a contact address, sent them a letter, and they lived in the Yukon. And you could see the response there on top. So unfortunately, they couldn't really help me too much, because at the time I had actually managed to find in another way who was behind Speakeasy Software. But they were very, very happy to talk about the old days. So yeah, around that same time, in another magazine, I found the name of Brian Benninger associated with a financial analysis package that was released by Speakeasy. So not the most common name, but after a couple of attempts, I managed to find an email, and I wrote to Brian, and you can see his response, or part of his response below, was much longer than that. He told me all about the history of Speakeasy Software, so much interesting historical information. Unfortunately, he had not kept copies of anything. And I only found that copy pictured on the left 15 years later in 2023. But regardless, the people aspect and the historical aspects to me were, so interesting. Another story. Some of you may be familiar with this. A game called Chambers of Zenobia. It's an adventure game. It was written by an author called Stephen Sachs. He was in high school at the time in California. I've been looking for this game for over 20 years. It exists. It's long existed in pirated form, thankfully, but there's no known original. And there's a whole sordid story of counterfeiting, yes, associated with this one copy that did surface back in 2022. I also wrote a Juice.gs article about this. And there was also an Ars Technica article about this whole story of counterfeiting. And I myself posted a story online. So about a year ago, I get an email, and you can see it on the right there. So it's somebody writing to me and telling me, they found my name and they're wondering if I can try and link them up with someone who would be interested in a large collection of Apple II software. So I said, well, probably, yes. And it took some time to figure out how to make this work again, but I was able to arrange a pickup. And that pickup involves a great chat about how they acquired all the material, how they used the Apple II in its early days, their interests, their spouse's interests, spouse who had now passed away. And it's led to things like this. So Master Trader, this game is completely unknown by Argonne Games. The only mention of this game is in a sci-fi magazine back in the early 80s, a very quick note about a trading game that the genre of trading games, and a game that's called Master Trader by Argonne Games. That is the only mention, not available anywhere. Things like the middle picture, games by Dynacomp. Some of them, a couple of those, the Star Trek game I think was already archived, but some of the other ones were not. That's the original packaging, by the way. It's just photocopied sheets and a disc. And then a bunch of nibbles away to autoload files, which we had no copies of those. Now we actually have even more, because I know Tom Green found some other copies of this at some point, but now we have pretty much a complete set of those autoload files. A game called Singles Nights at Molly's, which is a card game. Again, pirated versions of this, yes, fairly widely available, but no original no archive version from an original title. And talking about surprises and welcome interruptions, literally a few months ago, I got this. This is from the second set of letters that I sent around 2018 or so. And, somebody writing to me, and you see the date, April 2026, I was going through, I had saved your letter back from 2018 about Phoenix Software, and I have some games and some other Apple II titles. And do you want to chat about that? And I said, yes. And then they're like, okay, well, if you want the games, be happy to send them to you. So yeah, determination, luck, and patience. So that Phoenix customer list, still working some magic more than 40 years after it was made and 23 years after I received it from Ron Unrath. And people genuinely still happy to talk about the Apple II and about how the Apple II was so important in their lives, so interesting, and the connection that they've made from the Apple II. And by the way, it just picked up, literally yesterday, I picked up a couple of games here from one of those connections. One of the titles is called TSK Task Force 58, TSK FRC 58. We just imaged it this morning. That title, it's got serial number 50 on the disc, which is probably, again, as high as it goes. And that title does not exist anywhere else, except now it does. Okay, so we're getting to the end of the story. Certainly hope you've enjoyed it so far. So what I've taken out of the last 23 years of doing that as a hobby is people. People are happy to tell their stories. And they're interesting stories, and they're interesting people. So it's been very fulfilling to be able to preserve the bits and bytes, but in many cases, it's the relationships that I developed through doing so that have been even more rewarding. And of course, today's an opportunity for more of this, which is fantastic. As I mentioned, archiving is really about a considerable amount of determination, mixed in with a good dose of luck, some patience. Nowadays, the technical hurdles mostly overcome, so it's about finding the software. And no doubt there's still more of it out there. So everything I've shown you today, for which we actually have original discs. I'm still looking for Zenobia, if anybody's got a copy of that. Everything has been archived. It's all been made available through the Internet Archive. Now, some of it might still be in raw flux image format. Many of them are in the Wazade collection. And many of those discs are discs that we definitely almost left behind. Oh, okay. So maybe one more thing to bring this home. So I look at Masquerade, this really unlikely chain of events that started there, and the wonderful ways that some things just sort of come together. I was always very interested in learning more about Masquerade. The author's name, as I mentioned, Dale Johnson. Okay, so I tried periodically for many years to find him. Ron Unrath at Phoenix had lost touch. Same for other Phoenix alumni. And you try to do a search for Dale Johnson in Chicago and see what comes up. So no luck for a long time. I did have a couple of hints. I had the name Christine, which was probably his partner, I thought, because Christine Johnson was credited on the game Mad Venture, which was written by Dale Johnson. And Ron Unrath had told me that he had 2 twin boys and that he worked for an insurance company. So in 2021, I did another search, and through 411 and those types of people finding services, I managed to find a Christine related to 2 others with a last name Johnson that were about 40 years old that once lived in the Chicago area. So I took a chance and I wrote a letter, and I got a response. And I had reached the right person. Unfortunately, she didn't remember too much about the games, but she mentioned to me that Dale actually had passed away in 1999, which explained why he had essentially fallen off the face of the earth. So that was unfortunate, and unfortunately, it's not going to be possible to get more info on the inspiration for Masquerade and all of the above. But there's also some nice closure on having tried to find that information for so many years. Okay, I said that was the last thing. There's actually one more final last thing. So the discs we've been able to make available relatively easily. But the other piece I had is information, historical information stories, like the one that I shared today. So, a lot of that information is in my emails, in notes, in recordings. Some of it's in my head. So I was like, okay, what do I do about that? So this is what I decided to do. I wrote a book. It's called Secrets of the Apple II Gaming World. It's about the kinds of games that I talked about today, not the big hits, but the games that were typically very little known. It's got pictures and stories and stuff, and I'm happy to launch it today as part of INIT Hello. This is the launch day. Here's a it's a proof copy, but it's pretty much the exact same. If anyone wants to take a look. And it's available through Amazon. And let's see if this works. It's always a little bit risky when you try to do these things in front of a crowd. Okay, but this is my book page, a2gamesecrets.cgwmuseum.org, which explains what the book is about. It shows you a few pictures. And then let's see if this works. It does. So there you go. So you can now get it through Amazon. Like I said, my final proof copy, you can pass it around, feel free. There's really minimal changes between that and the final published copy. And I do have a few copies here. If anybody is interested, just catch me. I'd be happy to get you a copy. So that's it. That really was the last thing. And I'm happy to take questions, comments, discussions, by all means.
Remember to repeat the questions.
Okay, we'll do, yes.
So mechanically, I find your website, download the image, then do I need the applesauce hardware to make a floppy of it, or do I run an emulator or both? What's the process for those of us who want this?
So the question was about how to get the software and to essentially run it. And the answer is it's really pretty easy for most of it because of 4AM, because the easiest way to get most of that software is to go to the WASD collection. You could actually run it directly in your browser, or you download the WAS file and use it in your emulator. So that's for the great majority of this. You could also go to the 4AM collection and get a clean cracked versions. There's a number of titles that have been clean cracked there. There's a few titles which, as of yet, have not been converted from the raw Flux A2R, for those who are familiar with applesauce, to the WAS or to a cracked copy. So for those, you would have to, if you want to do it yourself, I mean, you could wait until at some point it'll catch up, but otherwise you could download the A2R and then run it through the applesauce software, which you don't actually need an applesauce for, and then convert it to a WAS file and use it yourself. If it's a fairly easy title, you'll have good luck automatically doing it. If it's a complex title, the software might not convert it automatically for you. But for the great majority of title, they're already available for you in WAS format. Well, you don't need to, but I mean, if you want to write it to a floppy disk, you would probably need to do the clean cracked version. The WAS format, writing it back to a floppy disk is possible, but it requires well, you'd have to master it through the applesauce software, and it's not straightforward. But running it through an emulator is too easy.
Question about Masquerade. I had that game party copy. My brother and I used to play that all the time, and yeah, it was too hard. We remember, I mean, after seeing the solve and what you do to win, it was like, wait, it's ridiculous. No way we're ever going to do that. Do you remember anything about a contest? Yes, can you talk about that if you do?
For sure. So Masquerade came out in 1984. I have to say it was around the time when a number of, well, actually, interestingly enough, and I don't think there is a relationship between the two. I don't know if anybody's familiar with a book called Masquerade by British author Kit Williams. And that book, what it was a series of illustrations, and there was a code hidden in the pictures. And if you solved the code, you would actually get a location to where the author had buried a golden hare, Hare, not Hair, and it was somewhat valuable. So that book actually was a somewhat big seller. That was in the late 1970s. I forget the exact year, and people were digging up backyards and things like that, trying to find that. It ended up being solved in a very tortuous way by somebody who cheated. But it kind of energized this idea of contests, $1,000 or whatever, if you're the first one to solve. There's a few games for the Apple II that were like that. One of them was it was by level 10 Dakin 5 Alchemstone. So that was a title that was like that. There was another title called Prism by IDSI Software, which was a similar kind of thing. Masquerade actually came in the packaging. There was a little contest form, and it said, if you solve the game, there's going to be a code at the end. Send in that code, and it wasn't the first person, it was a draw. But essentially, by this date, one lucky winner will win $1,000 for solving the game, because it was considered so difficult at the time. I'm told by Ron Unrath that the prize was claimed by a lady from New York. That's what he told me. But at the time, Ron had sold Phoenix Software, it had turned into American Eagle, and the company that's actually still around today as a web services provider came from the Apple II days. The owner had purchased Phoenix Software at the time. So Ron told me that it was American Eagle who actually paid out the prize to a lady from New York. That's all I know about it. But yeah, there was a contest to finish the game. Any other questions, or go ahead, Ken?
For those of us who don't have a 40-year-old customer database, how can we contribute to these discoveries?
I would say if you find discs, original discs, and especially you can look through the Waza Day collection to see if it's already been archived or not. The Internet Archive is really where most of those titles are. I know I've put all of my I send them to Jason and he puts them on, but I've put all of my, every year I put all the images that I create on the Internet Archive. So you can check to see if what you have is already there or not. But yeah, if you have a disc, if you know of somebody that has a disc, yes, like either if you have the applesauce, then you can actually flux image it yourself, or get in touch with me or 4am or Jason, and we'll make sure that we can grab an image of that disc and make sure that it is preserved.
I would say even if it's already preserved, try to flux it anyway, because in my travels, I have found patched editions of games that had been fixed by the manufacturer during its print run. So it's good to have multiple sometimes.
Yeah, so the comment, which is a good comment, was to, even if it's already been archived, it's not a bad idea to flux it, which I agree with, because there can be so many different versions out there. And back in the days, yes, Copy 2 Plus had relatively good version control, but other titles, you have no idea what version it is. The versions are not numbered. They just happen to make some fixes and then just released it for the next set of master discs. But there's no version identifier anywhere, and the only way that you know is by actually comparing the data that you do from the flux captures of the two disks.
Now, if I wanted to solve that, presumably I could put the code into an AI program and it would do it for me. Was any of that done cheating? And when did that start?
You mean for solve that?
Solve the adventure without playing it the old-fashioned way.
I mean, so the question is whether or not, like today, you could use AI to solve an adventure game, and whether or not back then, if I understand correctly, back then people were actually cheating to try and solve games, especially if there was a contest or so forth. I'm not convinced. You know what? I've never actually tried it. I'm not convinced that you could ask AI to solve the game for you, other than it looking at a solve that's already out there. But that would be an interesting experiment. But there was definitely some cheating going on back then. And cheating, well, depends how you look at it. But one of the things, so I mentioned one of the companies, for example, that I was able to communicate with the founder, which was Highlands Computer Services. So in the Washington area, in Washington State, sorry, in the Seattle area, call Apple and all that. So the founder of the company is a man by the name of Butch Greathouse, and he told me that it was essentially a two-person company. Him and his one partner that he had from Call Apple, and yes, they were writing the games, they were self-publishing, they were distributing, and then they were also answering the phones. And a lot of the calls that they got was from people asking for hints on how to solve the games, which they did. So they gave hints through phone and that sort of a thing. So I mean, it's not really cheating. It's some of the games, some of the puzzles were rather convoluted, and there was probably no way that you would find out how to solve it without actually getting some help, right? So there's a lot of the games. I mean, I don't know if there's Scott Adams fans out there, but many of the Scott Adams games are actually kind of like that. A number of the early online systems games, they're not really fair, and it's not that it's that the puzzles are, require you to guess things that you would never guess, or to associate two things together that you wouldn't necessarily associate, right?
Yeah, the term I've seen for that is moonlight. Yeah, just as a shorthand way of saying, hitting the bird cage with the iron bar to release the bird is not in any way a reasonable action to try to take.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. Exactly.
Moon logic.
Moon logic.
Okay, actually, probably should call it here.
Okay.